All right. Hello, everybody. This is going to be our re-recording of our meal planning and prepping webinar. I apologize that the first one didn't work as we had some technical difficulties. So this will not include any live questions, obviously, since I'm just re-recording the education component. However, I did previously send out the audio of our live session. So if you do want to just listen to it, you are more than welcome to do that. And this will walk you through more just education components. So we'll be talking today about successful meal planning and prepping. So just to review your Keto Flex goals, so things that you should be considering when planning your meals, is that for Keto Flex, the goal is to work up to getting 6 to 9 cups of vegetables a day. Ideally, you're getting some cooked and some raw. To have some prebiotic fiber every day, incorporate some resistant starch every day. And I noted unless you're very sensitive to carbohydrates, so some people it's not appropriate, especially at the beginning, to include any resistant starch, that they're just not insulin sensitive yet and not getting into ketosis. Or if you have like major gut issues, you probably want to address those first. But that's something we can work with you on. But generally speaking, if you're in a good space and your gut is pretty healthy, then including some resistant starch is a good idea, as well as some probiotic foods every day, and then getting adequate protein. So if I've worked with you to create your macronutrient ratios, I've calculated this number for you. But just so you know what it is, it's between 0.8 and 1 gram per kilogram of lean body mass. Generally, I don't recommend going less than 50 grams a day. That just tends to be the lowest we like to have most people at. So that's something to consider. You can have occasional low glycemic and mixed fruit. And then, of course, lots of healthy fat, which is one of the areas that tends to be most challenging for people initially, is figuring out how to get that fat in. So we're going to go over that today as well. Eating more vegetables is definitely a big opportunity for a lot of people. Even those who are getting into ketosis right now, I would say this is one area that all of us, including myself, can really work on, is increasing that vegetable number. So we'll go over some potential ways to do that as well. And again, macro reminders, just so we know, when we're building each individual plate or individual meal, we should be taking into consideration our individual macronutrient ratios. So again, each person's macros are specific to them. So the amount of each category you eat will differ from person to person. However, there are general guidelines, which are working up to 75% of your total calories coming from fat, between 10 to 20% coming from carbs, and 10 to 15 from protein. The reason, a lot of times you guys will ask me if you can eat something specific or send me a picture. And my response is always, it depends. And I know you guys love that response and it's your favorite, that you want it to be very specific or for me to just give you a black and white yes or no answer. However, it really depends on, how close you are to these guidelines for you, for your individual macros, as well as how your body is responding. So is your blood sugar raising? Are your ketones within range? Did you eat a lot of carbohydrates otherwise during the day? So we have to consider, a whole picture and not just a food by itself. So that's often why I'm saying it depends and asking you more questions when getting these answers. I also want to note too that using some form of tracking system is the only way to really determine if you're hitting your goals, at least in the learning stages. So usually it takes a couple of months, I would say probably 2 to 3 months for people to really start feeling comfortable knowing specifically how much of each category they need on their plate and how to build those meals. So I always recommend some form of tracking, whether that's using an app, using a handwritten log, or using one of the macro trackers that I've created with you. Most of you, we've had conversations about these things. And I'll just say, those who are tracking their macros tend to get into ketosis much quicker. And I think stick to the diet easier, because you're getting those quick wins and really know how to make adjustments. So even if it's a learning process for you, I highly recommend, putting some effort into learning to track your food, and we can work together to figure out what the best system is for you. I apologize, I'm out of breath. All right, so these are guides I already sent in the email to you guys, but if you need them again, just go ahead and respond once you get this recording. These are just some sample guides to give you an idea, especially for those of you who aren't using an app for tracking but are using maybe a handwritten log. It can be really hard to know what your grams are unless you're unless you're looking everything up or using an app. This is not information that most people, even I, just keep in my head. So, as an example, one of the big ones is fat. A serving of fat, these are examples of about a serving of fat, each being about 10 to 15 grams. Most people need somewhere between 15 to 20 servings a day in order to hit their 75% goal. So, 1 tablespoon of liquid oil, such as avocado oil, coconut oil, or extra virgin olive oil, as well as like solid oils like ghee or butter, an 1/8 a cup of olives, a 1/4 cup of shredded coconut, a 1/4 cup of full fat coconut cream, 2 to 3 tablespoons of heavy cream, a 1/4 cup of full fat sour cream, 30 to 40 grams of cacao nibs, 1 tablespoon of avocado oil mayo. These are just some examples, ones that are commonly used. Generally speaking, about a tablespoon of any liquid or solid oil is going to be about 10 to 15 grams, or 1 serving. Same with protein. These are guides that just break down fat and protein content, so you know when you are choosing proteins. We do consider fat, but typically, if you're counting just portions, then you would just count this like a meat, like beef or chicken, towards your protein goal, as well as eggs. But you can see, like eggs have 10 grams of fat. Ground beef has 16 grams of fat when it's an 85% lean. So we can see that there is still fat included in these things. Some of it does cook out. So just to consider that, you typically want to wait after cooking. But these are just good guidelines, as well as fat and fiber, or in other words, fat and carbs, since we're tracking total carbs. That, nuts and seeds, they are high in fat, but a lot of them are high in carbohydrate as well. So this is one area we have to kind of pay close attention to make sure you're not eating too many nuts and seeds, because you can go over your carb count really quickly. All right, now the other question is, how do we get in 6 to 9 cups of vegetables? Quite a lot. I would say most people are generally eating maybe 1 serving of vegetables a day, sometimes 2. I know some of you guys have worked up beyond that or naturally wanted it, but this is definitely a big area of opportunity for all of us, including myself, that I'm constantly working on. And doing this webinar re-inspired my own meal prepping. So we bought lots of vegetables this week. But generally speaking, these are guidelines from the Wahls Protocol. So Terry Wahls, she recommends getting 3 cups of leafy greens, 3 cups of sulfur-rich food, and 3 cups of like other colorful foods, those that are within the guidelines. So this can kind of just help you break this down, and then this can help with planning as well. So you can choose, each of these categories when you're going to shop and plan. So these are some leafy greens. Those are the kind of more obvious ones, like spinach, romaine, dandelion greens, Swiss chard. I was going to say kale, but kale is technically in the cabbage family, so I would not go there. Sulfur-rich foods are going to be things like asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kohlrabi, garlic. So some of those things. So having lots of that in the diet. And then this breaks down some additional things like colorful foods, in each category. So that's kind of a nice guideline, and I already sent these out to you guys. All right, so let's get into meal preparation. I'm gonna get a glass of water, sip of water. So I'm recording this late and my voice is a bit quiet because my baby's sleeping. Okay, so meal planning challenges. So as most of you know, switching to a mostly plant-based diet does take a lot of planning, right? You know that when you're hungry, it's much easier to reach for whatever is available. If you don't have a meal already prepped, and you get in a bind, it's going to be much harder to eat ketogenic or eat a lot of vegetables and eat on this diet. So it's good to, in your mind, just get kind of used to the fact that if you're really going to embrace this lifestyle and this change, you're going to have to find consistent systems for meal planning and prepping. That's just going to be a part of it. Um, when you're hungry and you don't have these meals that are compliant available, it's so easy to grab something that's, you know, off of the Keto Flex diet, or to go grab something quickly, or maybe even skip a meal and ultimately end up not feeling very well, or not getting enough fat in. So it's just good to consider. So sorry. Okay. The other challenges can be like finding recipes that fit the diet and that work for you as far as your cooking skill and preferences. Time and budget restraints. I know a lot of people find it overwhelming to meal plan and prep, which is totally reasonable. It's a lot of work. But we are going to hopefully help you develop some simpler systems. Sometimes lack of cooking skills, you don't enjoy cooking. A big one that I think people don't think about is that the kitchen isn't set up for cooking. So when they're going to cook, then there's a lot of barriers to making it happen. And then not setting aside specific times for shopping and cooking. You always say like whatever's not on your calendar is not going to happen, right? It's very easy to fill the space with whatever else you're doing. So if you don't have specific time for these things, they're not likely to happen. Okay, so when it comes to cooking, it's really important to understand yourself and to get that you're a unique individual with unique preferences, desires, skills. So it is really important to not force yourself to be a different person, but try to set up systems that work for you, knowing how you operate and what your preferences are, so that you're more likely to succeed. So there are really two parts to this. One is you might have to learn new skills, and sometimes you might have to change your perspective. So if you don't necessarily like cooking, you might have to shift that perspective a little bit, focusing on your goals and focusing on the benefits of cooking and finding ways to make it more enjoyable, because it just is a part of really, living a healthy life, is that we need meals available that are compliant to your diet. And you might have to open up yourself to learn new skills, and be okay sometimes doing things that you don't want to do. And this is where a little bit of commitment and dedication come in. But some things to ask yourself are things like, do you enjoy grocery shopping? I'm so sorry. Do you enjoy grocery shopping? Um, how much time do you actually want to spend cooking? Does cooking like relax you, or do you find it fun, or do you just consider it a necessity? Do you enjoy the process of cooking? How much time not do you want, but do you have to cook either daily or weekly? And then also, do you have enough like storage space in the fridge, freezer, pantry? Those things are things you should consider as well. What's important about this is just understanding that you want to set up, how much time you're spending on meal prepping and shopping, and also how you're choosing meals. So like you don't want to get super complicated meals that take a really long time if you don't have that much time. That seems really obvious, but I've actually seen that happen quite a lot, where people think they have to get these really complicated recipes and it takes, hours to cook, and that's just not sustainable. I guess I needed to film this another time, but I'm not gonna redo it, so you guys can bear with my yawning. Um, okay, so these are some things to consider. And then, again, just really finding ways to meal prep that fit into your current lifestyle and personality, as well as making the adjustments we talked about. All right, so the number one thing that you should start with is preparing your kitchen. This might seem obvious, but this is a big piece of making sure you can successfully meal prep. If your kitchen is disorganized, if there's dishes in the sink, if you can't find the tools that you need, if they're difficult to reach and you have to get out a step stool every time, whatever it might be, those would be considered barriers to you accomplishing your goal of cooking your meals. And it might seem, not that big of a deal, but when you come to cook and you don't necessarily want to, and maybe you're tired and all of these things, when there's even a small barrier, it is likely that that will keep you from accomplishing the task at hand. So I do recommend, if you haven't already done this, taking one day just to do a kitchen audit, doing some decluttering and organizing of your space, and then asking if there is any area in your kitchen that is limiting you from cooking. This is also a great time to remove any foods that are not compliant with the diet so that they're not a temptation, and that you can really start thinking about how you want to plan for your future meals and your future goals. If your kitchen is decluttered, it makes it much more difficult to prep and often causes overwhelm. You also might want to simplify the tools that you actually need. So I have seen a lot of people who have a lot of random stuff in their kitchen in places that they don't need to be, and maybe stuff they haven't used for years. So it can be really nice just to simplify the process and simplify the tools you need. Another huge one is clearing up counter space, so making your counters functional. If you don't have somewhere to like cut vegetables, for example, it's going to be very difficult to cook. And then laying things out in a way that makes cooking easier. So having, coffee next to coffee machine, having all of the dishes in one place, and then having maybe your spoons and stuff by the stove or your spices easier to reach. Like, for example, a lot of people have spices up in the shelves. Mine used to be like that too, but you know how easy it is for that to get disorganized, like even if you have a spice rack. So I actually took all of mine out and put them in the drawer, just laying flat. I don't even need necessarily an organizer in there. I can see them all, they're reachable, and they're directly next to the stove. And for me personally, that has made the process actually so much easier. And it allows the space to be just freed up. And I don't use counter space like pulling all of my spices down. So simple changes like that can really save you a lot of time in the long run. It can be helpful to organize your pantry spaces into zones, like having cans in one place, spices in one place, coffee and tea in one place, baking items, etc. Again, this might seem obvious to you, but sometimes it's not stuff we really like think about, or we don't notice how our current setup is inhibiting us. So one question I would ask yourself is, rate yourself from 0 to 10 on how you feel in your kitchen right now. So if you have a piece of paper and pen, you can just go ahead and write that down. 0 to 10, how do you feel in your kitchen right now? Noticing all my typos. And then also, on a scale of 0 to 10, how do you feel about cooking right now? You can go ahead and write it as well. And then what would you like to change about your kitchen or about cooking? And then also, how would you like to feel about cooking? All right. So we're just gonna jump over to some helpful tools. So some tools I personally really love are Instant Pot or crock pots, air fryers. Obviously, you have your oven, your stove. Like a steaming basket can be really great. Blenders, immersion blenders sometimes can be really great for like soups or sauces, things like that. I'm a big fan of using tools. So if you have the ability to purchase a tool that will make it easier to cook, I recommend doing it for sure. You don't need to make things harder on yourself. So, like, I personally use my air fryer and my Instant Pot a ton. I do use the oven, I do use the stove, but like, if I could cook something, I'm so sorry, guys. If I can cook something in my air fryer and it takes 10 minutes versus 30 minutes in the oven, I'm pretty much always going to do that. Um, Same with the Instant Pot. It's usually super quick. You can often get like pre-marinated stuff. Of course, checking your ingredients, just throw it in there. Or same with like a slow cooker or a crock pot. It's a great way to just be able to throw things in and let them cook throughout the day without really having to think about it. So think about what tools you might want in your space. And if you're not sure about this, we could in coaching we can look at some recipes or some ideas together. All right, so let's get into meal planning. All right, so how to plan. So there's kind of, I'm sure there's other ways too, but these are kind of the main areas I often talk with clients about, which are the recipe method, the no recipe method, adapting favorite meals, using pre-made meals, and then other sort of like easy ways to create meals. So the recipe method is simply to select, 5 to 7 meals to make for dinner and lunch leftovers. Um, if you can find recipes that you can make at the same time, that is ideal. But a lot of people will choose to make dinner every night and then save the leftovers for lunch. So if you like to have specific recipes, then you can go and search, like the Apollo website or online and find 5 to 7 recipes for the week that you're going to make. Then obviously create your list according to those recipes online so that they're ready to go. My preferred method of cooking is the no recipe method, which is basically to create mix and match meals. Except for occasionally I'll make like a recipe, but most of the time this is sort of my method, especially for lunches. Or if I'm just trying to like increase my variety of vegetables or the amount of vegetables I'm consuming. This is to choose a variety of vegetables. Ideally working up to the 9 cups a day we talked about earlier, choosing 3 to 5 proteins, choosing your fat sources, and then anything additional like dressings or sauces, or things that you might like, and then combining those into bowls, salads, or unstructured meals throughout the week, like just putting the items on a plate. The nice thing about this, like for example, is you can easily take a bunch of vegetables, like 5 to 7 different types of vegetables, stick them on a pan and roast them in the oven all together. And then you can use those on top of a bowl with your protein of choice, maybe some avocado, some olive oil. And that's a really super quick way to build meal. Hopefully that makes sense. Then you can do the same with like salads. You can get any kind of salad base, whether you like lettuce or spinach or kale or a combination, arugula, and kind of just throw on your protein, then your nuts and seeds, some additional vegetables, and any dressing or sauces you like. So those are like really simple ways. So remember, you don't need to overcomplicate it. Overcomplicate it. Your meals don't need to be fancy. If you like to do that every once in a while, great. But generally speaking, as long as you're getting nourishing foods, you can still eat really tasty food without making it so complicated. The other thing you can do is take favorite meals that you've had even before getting on this protocol and try to make simple swaps. So, for example, maybe you've previously really loved pasta and spaghetti is one of your favorite meals. Then we can look at that recipe and say, how can we adapt this recipe? So, one obvious way would be to switch the noodles. So, a lot of people use like spaghetti squash or butternut squash or zucchini and use spiralized versions of those. A lot of places like Whole Foods has already spiralized butternut squash and zucchini. Spaghetti squash also is fairly affordable and you can make a lot. It also freezes really well. So those can be really nice substitutes to like spaghetti noodles, for example. And then maybe you have that with a salad and a lot of extra dressing and fat. So that's just one example. Most meals can be adapted so that they're still familiar. They may not be completely the same, but you can still get the familiar tastes and flavors. The other thing that I really love people to utilize is pre-made items. That could be pre-made meals, like buying meals like Nutrition for Longevity and having those, every lunch, and or just freezing them, getting the hot meals and freezing them and having them sort of as emergency meals. So if you do, get in a pickle and you're like need a quick meal, you have that available. There are other, brands, there are other meal kits as well, but those are the ones obviously that Apollo works with. So using pre-made meals can be a great sort of resource, but you can also get pre-made or pre-cut items. Like they often make salad kits that you can easily swap out use all the ingredients and then just make or use a different dressing. They often have bags of produce like stir fry bags, which all the vegetables are pre-cut and all you have to do is dump them in the pan and add on your sauces. Other pre-cut vegetables like I hate cutting onions and garlic. Or I don't know who likes cutting onions, but I really particularly don't like it. So a lot of times I'll just buy pre-cut onions. Like yes, it's more expensive, but to me it's worth my time and my eyeballs, right? So you can just do that, or you can buy like pre-shaved Brussels sprouts or halves or whatever. So a lot of times the part of cooking that takes the longest is the preparation. So like cutting vegetables and preparing all your stuff. So sometimes if you can just grab stuff that's ready to go straight in a pan, easy there. You can also buy already marinated or seasoned meats that can just be thrown in the oven or Instant Pot, right? So again, find resources. You don't need to make it harder than it is. Not saying it's always easy, but we don't want to overcomplicate it either. Of course, if we're looking for pre-marinated stuff, the thing I just want to note is check the ingredients, right? Make sure there's no hidden sugar or seed oils. But generally speaking, if you're finding a meat that is labeled paleo or Whole30, those are often great labels to look for because the quality aligns. And then we just have to look at the quantity of your macronutrients. All right. I'm so out of breath for some reason. Okay, so let's talk about some simple meal ideas. So we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with the mix and match method, but some basic meals that are really simple and also easy to make large batches of and freeze them or store them in the fridge. Creating like power bowls or breakfast bowls, salads, obviously, soups are a great way to get a lot of vegetables and a lot of nutrients. They also freeze really, really well and last a long time. Frittatas or egg cups, almond flour pancakes can be frozen. And then, like I said, always making extra. So, especially meals that can be saved. If you can like quadruple your recipe, triple your recipe, quadruple your recipe, and then save some so you have those, that's a really great idea always. So in order to make bowls, you can think about it in this sort of formula. So you can combine one resistant starch, like an example would be sweet potato. Again, if that's compliant with your diet, if it fits into your macronutrients and doesn't impact your blood sugar negatively. Then on top of that, put 3 vegetables, so maybe Brussels sprouts, broccoli, sauteed spinach, and then add in your protein like chicken, steak, sausage, or salmon. Add a little sauerkraut or kimchi to get your probiotics. Then you add in your fat, right? So your avocado, your nuts, and then lots of oil or dressing. Right, so that's a really sort of simple way to create a meal. Other things are like salads. So doing your greens and then loading that up with additional maybe roasted vegetables or some other raw vegetables. You can add hard-boiled eggs, meat, or seafood, as well as a handful of nuts, avocado, and then again, lots of oil or dressing. Soups, same. You can do like a bone broth base to get some good fat and collagen in your system. And then put whatever vegetables you want in there and whatever meat. You can do even like a faux noodle, right? You can throw in, they have like green banana noodles, which are sometimes a good option, or you can do a vegetable noodle like zucchini or butternut squash, or the miracle noodles or something like that if you really like that in your soup. Frittatas and egg cups are great. They're usually super quick. Egg cups are so easy. You can literally just mix some ingredients and eggs or egg whites, put them into muffin tins, throw them in the oven for like 20 minutes, and they freeze as well as they last really great. And they're already individually portioned. Pancakes, same. A lot of people don't think about freezing pancakes, but if you freeze pancakes or baked goods and then throw them in the toaster and heat them up, they're delicious. So don't sleep on that. So if you are making those items, then go ahead and double up. Then additionally, here's some templates. So this is sort of a lunch or dinner template. If you want it this way, so you do your protein of choice. Typically, you'll build your meal around your protein because that kind of dictates the flavor. Then add in 1 cup of sauteed leafy greens, which would be 2 cups raw, or like a couple handfuls. 1 cup of sulfur-rich foods, 1 cup of colored vegetables. Add your favorite spices, and maybe you serve it with cauliflower rice if you want that extra serving of vegetables. Add your additional fat. If you're having dessert, right, or if you can include some fruit in your diet, then you can have your half a cup of low glycemic index fruit after your meal. And again, that is if it fits in your macronutrients. All right. Okay, sorry, I thought I skipped something. So the other thing I like to say is, especially for those of us who don't love cooking, if we are spending a couple of hours to cook anyways, we should try to be the most efficient and get the most out of that time that we can, which means if you can cook multiple meals at the same time, that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. It's going to be efficient. It's going to save you time, energy, effort, enjoyment, right? So there's many tools that you can use at the same time. It will take you some practice, get used to timing and keeping track of multiple things, but you can do it. You can use, for example, the oven, the stove, the air fryer, the Instant Pot, a steamer, a rice cooker. You can use all of those items at the same time as long as it doesn't trip your breaker. Um, but so if you can think about what can I put in the oven while I'm cooking these other items. So for example, great things to put in the oven that you don't need to like watch as much. Roasted vegetables, potentially a protein that needs to cook a little longer. Any baked items that are compliant. Those are great things to throw in the oven, like sweet potatoes or something like that. Then on the stove, I would recommend, reserving cooked vegetables for the oven. That tends to be a little bit easier, but you can do them on the stove. But on the stove, typically like easier meats to do on the stove are going to be like ground meats, right? Like ground beef or ground turkey, ground pork, anything like that. That's super quick, as well as any sort of like egg dishes, unless you're doing a quiche or muffins. You can cook basically anything in the air fryer. I like it also for like an additional protein. So for example, maybe on the stove you have some ground meat and then in the air fryer you're cooking your salmon. Salmon is really delicious and easy in the air fryer. Instant pots are great for soups. They're great for like slow cooked meats like pulled pork or something like that. As well as, you can do pretty much anything in the Instant Pot, but those are kind of the easiest things. So any protein or soups, maybe in the Instant Pot. And then your steamer for additional vegetables if you want to do that. Your rice cooker, obviously, we're not eating rice on the diet, but occasionally people use quinoa. But otherwise, you can use like rice cooker for like steaming vegetables as well. All right. Just make sure you use timers. And note that too, so you don't have to think about it as much. So you can set timers if possible. All right, so the last sort of area we're going to talk about is making cooking fun. So, sorry, not quite the last area. So one of the big things is, if you don't enjoy cooking, then making it fun is a really great way to help improve enjoyment. So ways to do that are to make it social. So even consider, hosting a potluck or a party, something like that, and challenge your friends to create a keto meal. Do something you enjoy while cooking. So don't do work. Try not to do education, but just something you enjoy. So if you enjoy listening to like a fun podcast or music or dancing, maybe you have a show or a movie on in the background. Those are really simple things you can do, like and kind of multitask. You can also, celebrate food and practice gratitude. Those are really simple things to do. And I think, food does have big celebration culture, but it gets kind of removed when you get stressed about food. So bringing yourself back to celebrating food is important. Other things you can do are like call a friend or family member on FaceTime, get any family members involved that might live with you or are, around. Use theme nights like Taco Tuesday, right? That's fun and people get excited about that. If you like tea or do include a small amount of wine in your protocol, again, if it fits in your macros and fits in your protocol, then maybe like having your tea that you really enjoy or your glass of wine like while you're cooking can kind of incentivize yourself to enjoy the process and give you a little bit of relaxing treats. Is that the ideal way to drink alcohol? No. Ideally it's like post meal or with food, but it's a really great way to like incentivize yourself, so that might be a good choice. Again, forget about perfection. Meals don't need to be perfect. You're just nourishing your body. You're exploring and learning, and even the learning process is preventative, right? So that gives us a nice perspective. Anything new you learn increases neuroplasticity. So when you're learning to cook and learning new meals and doing something social that uses new skills, then you're actually benefiting yourself and improving neuroplasticity. So you're doing brain training, but that's more fun than brain HQ. Start small if you need to. So don't go, if you're not meal planning right now and planning all of your meals, don't expect that tomorrow you're going to wake up and have your whole week of 3 meals a day planned. start small. If you need to plan for only dinners or just breakfasts at first, then do that and then work up to more meals as you get more efficient and you kind of develop more cooking skills. The other thing I'll note is think about like when it makes sense for you to cook. So most people end up cooking in the evening, and that's usually just because of our work schedules. But that's sometimes a barrier in itself because you're tired and you've worked all day and you don't want to cook great. So maybe you can set your schedule up where you cook or shop when you actually have the most energy. So maybe that's doing it in the morning instead of the evening or doing it Monday versus Sunday. So that's something for you to think about is when it actually makes sense. The other thing I want to note is practicing gratitude seems simple, but it can be really, really powerful anytime we need to shift our perspective. Giving something a new perspective is the quickest way to enjoyment. So if we think about it, we are very fortunate that we have the option to cook in a kitchen, to choose what the foods we eat, to be able to do this protocol. Many people don't even have that option. Like I know many, many people in the world who don't even have a kitchen. Um, Even myself, there was one point I lived in San Francisco and I lived in an in-law unit with two other people, with like a tiny sink. I didn't have an oven, I didn't have a stove. So there's times, when many people don't even have the option to cook. So we actually are very, very blessed and fortunate that we, have the ability to nourish ourselves that way. So that could be one perspective I'd like to offer you. Okay. So these are just some additional resources to consider. I sent these out as well. The grocery guide, this is from Apollo directly. I always recommend people print this out because it breaks down the list of each food. This is just a very basic chart if you want to use to print out and write down your meals for the weeks. And this is just the check off grocery list. Okay, the last sort of area I want to talk about is choosing packaged foods. I get a lot of questions about this, and people send me a lot of emails with like, can I eat this food? Does this look good? So let's just quickly go over some basic things to look at. So we did a little interactive on this, but I'm just going to go over it quickly. So, sorry, we're yawning. I feel like my diaphragm needs to like breathe or something. Okay, so what to look for on packaged foods. So these are NewCo organic coconut wraps. So these are like a bread or tortilla replacement. These are one of the products that are listed in the Apollo resources, by the way. So, generally speaking, packaged food should be generally minimized or avoided, right? That's the ideal. However, we understand that they can be helpful tools at times and kind of help you replace some of the foods you might miss. So, just keep that in mind. We don't want to get the majority of your foods from packaged items, but we know that they're a helpful tool. One area to pay particular attention to is carb count. So one of the best habits for your health is to just practice reading labels. They'll be surprised how much you learn just from reading the label. So with anything like this, of course, this is like a wrap. We want to be mindful of carbs, right? Because especially in packaged foods, carbs can be much higher than we might expect. So we want to, of course, look at the carb count and see how it's going to stack up. Other things to look at are also, fat and protein, right? So just looking at our macronutrient ratios and how those are going to fit into our day. The other thing we want to look closely at are ingredients. So as a general rule of thumb, less ingredients tends to be better. That means usually it's more quality. It's not always the case, but usually it's pretty true. And then in case you didn't know, ingredients are listed in order of quantity. So whatever ingredient is listed first, that means that it's the highest quantity. So, and then down to the lowest. So in this particular tortilla, then it is mostly made of organic coconut meat. Then it has coconut water and then extra virgin coconut oil in that order of quantity. So that can be helpful to know, especially if like one of the first ingredients is like rice syrup or sugar, then we know basically that whole thing is sugar. And of course, you can confirm that by looking at added sugars and carbohydrates. And then on that note, we also want to look at added sugars, right? And sugars. This one doesn't have added sugars because it's all coming from the coconut, but it does have sugar present as well as carbohydrate. Looking at ingredients can also be important as far as quality. glycemic index, and as well as if you have any food sensitivities, then that's extra important to make sure. Most labels will have a section underneath with like allergy risks, so they'll note wheat, soy, milk, eggs most of the time, and some nuts. Just so you know. Okay, and then again, just always thinking about how this fits into your whole picture. All right, and then we are on to our questions. So if you have any questions from this, I know you guys got the previous audio and slides and resources, but please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I apologize, I was yawning the whole time. I don't know what's going on. I guess I need to go to bed. So, all right. Thank you so much. We'll see you on our next webinar.